It all began with a phone call. Just like every other year, the festive Christmas spirit had vanished as soon as the date had passed, and we counted down the last few days until the new year, for which Haruhi would no doubt have all sorts of plans. I was afforded a few days of peace. At the time, I had postponed all the house cleaning that needed to be finished before the new year, and was instead wrestling with shamisen in my room. "Quit struggling, hold still, it'll be over in a second." Ignoring his protests, I held the tiny predator with his newly grown winter coat under my arm. Ever since he turned my favorite denim jacket in the scrap, my human average memory suggested I should take the lesson to heart, and I made sure to regularly trim his claws. Shamisen's feline average memory was good enough, however, that he would sprint desperately away whenever he saw me holding the clippers. Catching him was a terrible hassle, and holding down the scratching, kicking, biting calico while I trimmed each of its claws to a reasonable length meant by the time I was finished, both of my hands were covered in countless scratches. But flesh wounds would heal, unlike the embroidery on my denim jacket, so I had to stay vigilant. It made me long for the days when he could understand human speech. "You were so cooperative then, Shamisen. What happened?" But if he started talking again, that was an ill omen of another sort, so perhaps it was better if he just meowed like a normal cat. Just as I was finishing his right paw and moving to his left, "Kyon, phone for you!" My younger sister burst into the room, holding the cordless phone. She grinned as she saw the struggle for dignity currently taking place between human and feline. "Oh, Shammy, are you getting your nails clipped? I'll do it!" Shamisen looked away as if to say, "No thanks," sniffing in a very human-like way. I let my sister clip his claws once. I held him down while she did the clipping. But an 11-year-old 5th grader doesn't have much sense for clipping nails, and she cut Shamisen's to the quick, annoying him enough to put him off his feed. While I was definitely preferable to her, he still fought me every time. I guess a cat's brain isn't very big in the end. "Who is it?" I traded the nail clippers for the telephone receiver. Shamisen saw his chance and twisted free, pushing off my knee and dashing out of the room. Holding the nail clippers happily, my sister answered. A boy, but I don't know who he is. He said he was your friend." With that, she ran out of the hallway in pursuit of Shamisen. I looked at the phone. Who could it be? If it was a boy, that ruled out Haruhi and Asahina, and if it was Koizumi, my sister would have recognized him. My other friends, like Taniguchi or Kunikita, would have called my cell, not my home. I punched the talk button on the receiver, muttering that I wasn't going to fall for any stupid surveys or sales scams. "Hello?" "Hey, Kyon, it's me. Long time no talk." I furrowed my brow at his throaty voice. Who the hell's this? I couldn't pretend that I had any recollection of the voice. "It's me, man. We were in the same class in junior high, remember? Did you forget already? I've been sighing over you for months." "Who are you?" "Nakagawa! Can't you at least remember the name of the classmate from a year ago? Or what? You go to a different high school and suddenly you don't care about your old pals? Come on, man." He sounded genuinely wounded. "No, that's not it." I cracked the lid on my memories and thought back to my 3rd year of junior high. Nakagawa, huh? I did remember him. He was a well-built, broad-shouldered guy. I thought he was in the rugby club or something. And yet, I looked at the receiver again. We'd only been in the class together that 1 year, and we weren't really close. We hung out in different groups of the class. Sure, we'd say hey or sup when we passed in the hallway, but if you wanted to know whether we talked every day, I could tell you for sure that we didn't. Since graduation, I hadn't had a single reason to think of his name or face. I started picking up the claw clippings Shamisen had left behind as I spoke. "Nakagawa, eh? Yeah, Nakagawa. I guess it's been a while. How you been? I heard you went to an all-boys school somewhere, right? So why are you calling me? Are you working for the Alumni Association or something?" "No, the alumni's group's headed by Pseudo. He goes to a public high school, but that's not important. I got something to tell you, okay? So listen, I'm serious." So what was so serious about this phone call out of the blue? I couldn't possibly imagine what he could be getting at. "Kyon, you gotta hear me out. This is something I can only tell you. You're my only lifeline here." Sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but what the hell, I thought. Let's hear him out. Let's hear what this estranged former classmate has gone to the trouble of calling me to say. "It's love. I'm serious, it's killing me. These last few months, it's all I can think about, whether I'm awake or asleep. It's gotten so bad I can't do anything else. Well, no, that's not true. I've been throwing myself into schoolwork and club activities just to distract myself. My grades have gone up, and I'm on the varsity team just after a year. And it's all because of love. Do you understand me, Kyon? Do you understand the suffering in my chest? Once I looked up your home phone number in junior high registry. Do you know how many times I hesitated to call you? My body's shaking right now. It's love. The incredible power of love has forced me to call you. Please understand." Look, Nakagawa. I licked my dry lips. A bead of cold sweat dripped down my temple. This is bad. I'm sorry, but your love is too I guess I can just say I'm sorry, I can't return your feelings. A cold shiver ran down my spine, if one ever had. I should say right now that I am 100% heterosexual. I don't have a hummingbird's weight's worth of desire to bat for the other team, both potentially and unconsciously. I am totally straight. I mean, consider this. It warms my whole body to think of Asahina's face and figure, but when I think of Koizumi, I just want to sock him, which means I'm not even like bi. You know, right? I spoke into the receiver without a clear idea of whom I wanted to address my thoughts to. So, Nakagawa, we can stay friends and stuff, but, there's just no way this can be a romantic thing. I'm sorry, okay? Good luck at that boys' school you're going to. I'm just gonna enjoy my normal high school life at North High. It's been good talking to you after so long, though. If we meet at some reunion, don't worry, I won't out you, buddy. So, see ya. Wait, Kyon! Nakagawa sounded suspicious. What are you talking about? You got the wrong idea. I'm not in love with you. What the hell are you thinking? Get your mind out of the gutter. So what was that it's love thing all about earlier? Whom had those words been meant for? Well, I don't know her name, but I do know she's a student at North High. Although I had no idea what he was going on about, I breathed a sigh of relief. I felt like a foot soldier at a foxhole at the front line of battle who just heard news of a treaty being signed. Getting a love confession from a guy was kind of surprising. In my case, anyway. Well then, explain yourself better. Who are you in love with? There's just a limit about how vague you can be after all. I was just about ready to put him on my block list. And anyway, what was the big idea, talking so seriously about love while still in your first year of high school? Maybe that was the craziest thing. It was embarrassing just to say it. I mean, love? It was this past spring, around May. Nakagawa started talking. There was something euphoric about his tone. She was walking with you. I can still see it clearly every time I close my eyes, and her form was so fetching, so beautiful. And that wasn't all. I saw a radiance shining out from behind her. It was no illusion. Yes, it was light as though from heaven itself. His rapturous tone had a dangerous edge to it, as though he was under the influence of a dangerous drug. I was overwhelmed. I had never felt such a feeling in my entire life. It was like electricity. No, like a thunderbolt had struck me where I stood. I stood there for hours, having lost all track of time. When I came to my senses, it was nighttime. That's when I knew. It was love. Nakagawa's words were like the feverish ramblings of an Andromeda strain patient, but I tried to make sense of them. According to him, he'd seen me walking with someone in May, and the sight of that person had overwhelmed him. She was a North High student, which meant that there weren't many possibilities. I had walked around town with many girls this past spring, to be honest. If she was a North High student, that eliminated my sister, so it had to be one of the 3 girls in the SOS brigade. Which meant... It was a fated encounter. Nakagawa continued his intoxicated rambling. Do you understand, Kyon? I never believed in anything as superstitious as love at first sight. I was a strict materialist, but my eyes have been opened. There is love at first sight. There is, Kyon. Why did I have to listen to him go on and on about it? Love at first sight? I asked if he was sure he wasn't being deceived by outward appearances. No, I'm not. His reply was decisive. I'm not being fooled by either face or figure. It's the inside that's important. I saw through to her soul in an instant. A glance was all it took. Nothing can change the impact that it made on me. Unfortunately, it's hard to put into words, but I've fallen in love. I feel like I want to keep falling. Do you understand, Kyon? Now it's my turn to say no. Forget about that. Anyway, I decided to cut off Nakagawa's insane chatter. So you were shocked, or whatever, by that girl in May, right? But it's winter now. It's been months. What have you been doing all this time? That's right, Kyon. Now that you mention it, it's been rough. These past few months have been pure suffering. My mind hasn't had a moment's rest. I'm constantly agonizing over what to do. I wonder about the part of me that could possibly be worthy of a girl like her. I'll be frank, Kyon. It was only recently that I realized that you were the one walking next to her. That's why I called you. That's just how dazzling she is. I've never felt this way about anyone else in my life. The fact that he'd fallen head over heels for a girl whose name he didn't even know, then mooned over it for months, was a little frightening. Asahina's, Haruhi's, and Nagato's faces appeared in my mind. I decided to cut to the chase. To be honest, I just wanted to hang up, but judging by his crazed tone, if I hung up on him, he'd just keep redialing me. Just tell me what the girl you fell for looks like. After a moment of silence, Nakagawa spoke. She had short hair, he said, speaking slowly as he recalled her. And she wore glasses. Uh-huh. The North High uniform looked spectacular on her. Uh-huh. and she was surrounded by a glittering aura. Well, I don't know about that. So you're talking about Nagato then? This was a surprise. I thought for sure that the person he was going to go crazy for would be either Asahina or Haruhi, but Nagato? I guess there was something to Taniguchi's A- grading. My first impression of her had been that she was an antique doll of a girl, quiet and eccentric, but I guess there are girl connoisseurs everywhere. Of course, now it's different. My opinion of her has completely changed over the last 6 months. So her name's Nagato then? Nakagawa's voice was strangely aroused. What characters does she use to write it? What's her full name? It's Yuki Nagato. Nagato is in Battleship, Yuki is in Hope, I told him. Oh, what a lovely name. Her family name is magnificent and strong, just like Nagato, while her given name's pure and clear, full of optimism and the possibilities of a future. It's neither banal nor overstated, just like the image of her in my mind. And just what image was that? How could a single look reflect anything but your own conceited delusion? You said it was on the inside that counted, but what does love at first sight have to do with that? I asked him. I just knew. He was annoyingly confident. This isn't just a delusion. I know it. I don't care about the outward appearance or personality. It's her intellect. I saw her. She had a godlike intelligence to her. I'll never meet such a highbrow girl again. There was still much I didn't understand. I'd have to look up highbrow in the dictionary later. So how can you tell all that from a single glance? You only saw her from a distance, and you haven't said one word to her. I can't help it. I just know it's true. Why does he have to yell? I'm grateful to God. I'm ashamed I've never believed in religion before. Now that I go to the neighborhood shrine every week to pray, and I've been going to the church from confession, both Protestant and Catholic. Well, that just makes you a heretic, I said. You can't just worship everything. Pick a god and stick to it. You got a point, Nakagawa said. Thank you, Kyon. I've made up my mind. I need worship but one goddess, and that's Yuki Nagato. I'll devote all my life to her. Nakagawa. He'd just keep going with all this nonsense if I let him, so I cut him off. It was just too corny, and I was starting to get irritated. So, what do you want? I get why you called, but what of it? What's the point of declaring your love for Nagato to me? I want you to give her a message for me, so said Nakagawa. I want you to convey her my words. Please, you're the only hope. You were walking right beside her. Surely you must know her well. He wasn't wrong. Everyone in the SOS Brigade was in the same orbit around Haruhi, and he said he saw Nagato and me in May, and she'd been wearing glasses along with her school uniform. So it must have been the day the SOS Brigade had gone on its first patrol, when I'd gone to the library with her. I got a little nostalgic thinking about it, but compared to then, I know 100 times more about Nagato now. More than I'd like, if I'm being honest. Feeling a bit keenly, I put a question to Nakagawa. So you remembered that I was walking with Nagato. So, did it occur to you that we might not just be friends? That we might, be dating? Oh, not even a little bit, answered Nakagawa without a moment's hesitation. You're in the Stranger Girls, back in junior high. I forgot what her name was, but you're not still going out with that one girl. There was plenty wrong with that idea that Nagato herself wasn't weird, but that was besides the point. This guy seemed to have the wrong idea. I remember Kunikina also being mistaken. That girl was just a friend, and I haven't seen her since graduating junior high. That was the first time I thought of her in a while, actually. I considered whether I should send her a New Year's card. I started to feel like I was just digging myself in deeper, so I changed the subject. So, what do you want me to tell her, man? Do you want me to ask her out? Do you want me to give you her number? No. Nakagawa's response was serious. As I am now, I am not worthy to show my face before her. There's just too much disparity, so that's why... He paused for effect. I want you to tell her to wait. To wait for what? I asked. To wait for me to come for her. Don't you see? Right now, I'm just a high school student with no value in society at all. Sure, I thought, but I'm the same way. So it's just no good. Listen, Kyon, I'm going to throw myself in the study starting now. No, I already have. I'll go straight into a national university. I mean, it's good to have goals, I guess. I'm going to study economics. I'll keep working hard, and when I graduate, I'll be at the top of my class. And when I start looking for jobs, I'm not going to go into government or corporate job, but a smaller company instead. He was laying out a blueprint with no idea whether it was realistic or just a pipe dream. If a demon overheard him, he'd probably die laughing. But I won't be satisfied with being a member of the proletariat for long. In 2 years, I have gotten expertise to start my own business. Nobody's going to stop you, so go right ahead, I thought. If I hadn't gotten my act together by then, I'd want him to hire me. I'll get my company moving in make that 3 years, getting listed in the second section of the Tokyo Stock Exchange, with yearly profit growth of at least 10%, and that's gross profit, I mean. His spiel was getting harder to follow, but undaunted, he continued. And by that time, I'll be able to take a breath. My preparations will be ready, you see. What preparations? My preparations to receive Nagato. I was as silent as a deep-sea shellfish as Nakagawa's words battered me like ocean waves. 2 years until I graduate from high school, and 4 years in college, then 2 years of an on-the-job training, followed by 3 years it'll take me to open my company and get it publicly traded. So that's 11 years. No, let's run it out to an even 10. In 10 years, I'll be a worthwhile member to society. So, are you fucking stupid? I think you'll understand why I said this. What girl could possibly just sit there and wait for a fucking decade? And for a guy she never even met to be asked to wait for 10 years for some guy she never even met to come and propose to her and then just sit there and do it? No human could do that. Unfortunately, Nagato wasn't human. I clicked my tongue. I'm serious. He really sounded serious, too. I'll stake my life on it. I mean it. If words could cut, his were slicing through the telephone wires. How was I going to talk him out of this one? Listen, Nakagawa. I thought about Nagato's slender form as she sat alone, reading. Look, this is just my perspective, but Nagato is actually pretty popular with the guys. It's kind of a problem for her, actually. You've got a pretty good eye for girls, I'll say that, but the chance of Nagato's gonna stay single for 10 years is 0. It was a total bluff. I didn't have a clue what would happen in 10 years, not even to me. And besides, something this important should be told to her in person. I'm not too wild about it, but I'll introduce you. It's winter vacation, so I'm sure she can spare an hour or so. I can't do it. Nakagawa's voice was suddenly quiet. I can't do it right now. I'd faint as soon as I saw her face. Actually, I caught a glimpse of her from a distance the other day. It was at the supermarket by the train station, and I just happened to see her from behind, and that's all it took to freeze me in my tracks. Meeting her in person, I can't do it! Man, this brain had a bad case of love fever, and it was serious too. But if he was so far gone as to tell all this stuff to a guy he barely knew over the phone, I was terrified of what he might say next. I already had one person like that to worry about. Haruhi. And now Nagato had gone and made the problem worse. Ugh, what a pain in my ass. I sighed loud enough for you to be able to hear it. Fine. Just, tell me again what you want me to say to her. Thank you, Kyon. Nakagawa sounded genuinely grateful. We'll definitely invite you to the wedding. I'll ask you to give a speech. The first speech, too. And I'll never forget you. If you want, there's always going to be a position for you at the company I'm going to start. Whatever, man. Just tell me what you want me to say. I listened to the extensively hasty Nakagawa while balancing the receiver on my shoulder as I looked around for a piece of loose leaf paper to write on. Just after noon the next day, I silently walked up the hill to North High. As the elevation rose, the white vapor of my breath became more visible. If you want to know why I was going to the school in the middle of vacation, it's because the SOS Brigade was holding its regular meeting. Today we'd also be doing a thorough cleaning of the club room. Although Asahina the maid would diligently sweep the floor, in accordance with the law that says that entropy always increases, a constant influx of stuff coming into the room when it's disrupted its order. The main sources of this chaos were Haruhi, who would swipe everything her eyes fell upon, Koizumi, who kept bringing new board games, Nagato, who was constantly tearing through thick books, and Asahina, who was devoted to brewing the perfect cup of tea. Basically, everybody but me. Left alone, the club room would turn into a disaster area. I finally proposed that everyone should take their stuff back to their homes, although Asahina's costume rack would be spared. Ugh, what a pain. It went without saying that the lack of spring in my step was due to the unwanted piece of paper in my blazer pocket. I'd written down Nakagawa's declaration of love for Nagato verbatim. It was so ridiculous that I wanted to chuck my pencil across the room any number of times. Only veteran seducers would be able to say such absurd things with a straight face. Wait 10 years for me? What is this, some kind of fucking joke? As I walked into the breeze coming up the hill, the familiar school grounds came into view. I arrived at the clubroom building an hour ahead of time Haruhi had set for the meeting. It wasn't because of the SOS Brigade rule that the last person to arrive for a meeting had to treat everyone else. That rule applied only to after-school activities. The previous day, Nakagawa said this. You can't just hand over the note. You just be a note-taker then. She might not even read it. You gotta read it out loud in front of her, and with the same passion I used in telling it to you. It was an unreasonable request. I had no reason, nor was I a simpleton enough, to do as he said, but I was just enough of a believer in the goodness of humanity to be slightly moved by his entreaties. So to do it, I needed to get Nagato alone, with nobody else around. If I showed up an hour early, I was sure nobody besides Nagato would be there, and Nagato would definitely be there. She was the most reliable alien-built android I knew, after all. After a perfunctory knock on the door was met by silence, I opened it. Hey. Did that sound too forced? I scolded myself and tried again. Hey, Nagato. I figured you'd be here. There, in the tranquil midwinter air that filled the room, Nagato sat quietly in a chair, as still and cold as though she were a life-size doll. The title of the book she was reading sounded like the name of a disease. She regarded me expressionlessly, raising her hand to her temple briefly, then lowering it. It was the same movement she'd do to adjust her glasses, except she didn't wear them anymore. I was the one who told her that she looked better without them, and now she was the one who left them off. So what was that just now? Had her habit from a few months ago returned? Nobody else is here yet? Not yet. Nagato answered concisely, then returned her gaze to the densely typeset pages of her book. I wonder if she considered blank spots were a waste of space. I awkwardly made my way toward the window, letting my eyes drift over the clubroom building down to the courtyard below. It was winter vacation, and there was hardly anybody on campus. All I could hear through the drafty window was the faint chanting of one of the more cold-resistant sports clubs. Standing there, I turned to face Nagato. She looked the way she always did, the same porcelain features and lack of expression. Now that I thought about it, we've been short a glasses girl for some time. Haruhi would probably make a play to fill the spot again sooner or later. I thought about such pointless things as I fumbled for the folded piece of loose leaf in my pocket, then pulled it out. Nagato, there's something I need to tell you. What is it? Nagato moved the finger to turn the page. I took a deep breath. There's this idiot who's obsessed with you, and as his agent, I'm gonna tell you what he told me. So, how about it? Will you listen? If she said no, I planned to tear up the paper and throw it away right on the spot. But Nagato looked silently up at me. Despite the icy color of her eyes, when they looked at me, they seemed to have a warmth that could melt snow. Had my explanation been that good? Nagato stared at me, her lips closed. Her gaze was like a surgeon peering at a patient. I see, she said, watching me unflinchingly. She seemed to be waiting for me, so I helplessly unfolded the paper with Nakagawa's confession on it and started to read. Okay, My dearest Miss Yuki Nagato, though I could not help myself, please forgive me for conveying my thoughts to you in this way. In truth, from the very first day I saw you... Nagato looked at me and listened. It was I who felt weirder and weirder as I read. The more I spat out Nakagawa's declaration of love, the dizzier I felt, as the stupidity of it all reached a crescendo. What was I doing? Was I crazy? The final stage of Nakagawa's life plan, as I read it out, involved a leisurely lifestyle in a nice house in the suburbs, with 2 kids and 1 white West Highland Terrier. Nagato silently watched me as I read. A keen sense of absurdity of what I was doing rose up within me. It was stupid. I stopped my emotionless reading. If I had to read any more of this nonsense, I'd go crazy. I never reached any kind of understanding with Nakagawa. There could be no relationship with anyone who possessed a mind capable of putting forth such oppressive lines. No wonder we were never close friends in junior high. He'd fallen in love at first sight, let stew for half a year, then suddenly had a messenger deliver an insane love confession. He was beyond help. Yeah, so it goes on like that for a while, but you get the point, right? To which Nagato replied, Understood. Seriously? I looked at her, she looked at me. Time passed quietly as though the very word silence had sprouted wings and was flying around us. Nagato tilted her head just slightly but took no other action, simply fixing me in her gaze. So, what now? Was I supposed to say something? As I was riffing through the vocabulary for the response. Message received. Her gaze never wavered. But I cannot comply. Her voice was as calm as always. There is no guarantee that I'll remain autonomous for the next 10 years, she said, then closed her mouth. Her expression did not change. Her eyes did not move away from me. Yeah. I looked away first, pretending to shake my head just to look away from those deep, dark eyes that threatened to suck me in. Yeah, I guess so. 10 years is too long for anyone. There were other problems with the confession besides the length of time, but for the time being, I was relieved. As to where this sense of relief came from, the short version is that I didn't care if it was Nakagawa or not. I didn't want to see Nagato walking around with some other guy. I can't deny that the image of the way Nagato looked back when Haruhi disappeared had struck with me. It wasn't that Nakagawa was a bad guy. He was actually okay. It's just that I couldn't forget Nagato's distressed face as she pulled softly on my sleeve. Sorry, Nagato. I crumbled up a loose leaf slip. This is my fault. I shouldn't have so faithfully written all down that stuff. I should have just told Nakagawa no when he called me. Just forget about all this. I'll give that moron a good talking to. He's not really the type to turn into a stalker, so you don't have to worry about that. Of course, if it was Asahina to get a boyfriend, I'd probably smack the living Oh. So that's how it was. I realized what the hazy feeling in my chest was. To put it bluntly, I didn't like the idea of some other guy getting between Asahina and me, or Nagato and me. It just bothered me, hence my relief. I guess I was pretty transparent. What about Haruhi? I didn't have to worry about her. She rejected any guy who got close to her. If there was some kind of natural disaster and Haruhi actually started going out with someone, she wouldn't be constantly looking for aliens and time travelers, would be nice to Earth, and would make things easier for me and Koizumi too. And the craziness I seemed to be constantly getting tangled up would come to an end too, surely. Perhaps that day would actually come, but it definitely was not here yet. I opened the window. The sharp winter chill cut through the indoor air, which had been warmed up by our body heat. I wound up and chucked the crumpled up ball of paper as far out the window as I could. The ball caught the wind and traced a steep arc down. It soon fell in the grassy area beside the covered path that led to the club room. I imagined it would be blowing along the ground, winding up in one of the gutters that ran along the school buildings, and eventually decompose along with rotting leaves. Oh, how wrong I was. Oh, fuck! Just then, a person walking down the covered path to the club room changed direction and made for the grassy area. She looked up, glared at me as though I tossed a cigarette butt, then strode over and picked up the paper I had just tossed. Hey, stop! Don't look at that! Ignoring my protest, she picked up the trash that no one had asked her to pick up, and uncrumpling the paper, began to read. Nagato continued to regard me wordlessly. I know it's sudden, but let's put on our thinking caps. Question 1. What was written on that paper? Answer. A confession of love for Nagato. Question 2. In whose handwriting was it written? Answer. Mine. Question 3. What would happen if some uninformed third party read it? Answer. They'd probably get the wrong idea. 4. What if Haruhi read it? Answer. I don't want to think about it. Thus did Haruhi Suzumiya scan the paper intently for a few minutes, eventually looking back up to me sharply, then for some reason, grinning unpleasantly. That cinched it. Today was not my day. Just 10 seconds later, she had already burst into the clubroom with ferocious speed and seized me by the collar. What the hell are you thinking? Are you an idiot? I'm gonna set you straight this instant. Jump out the window, now! She shouted with a grin. That grin looked pretty forced, but if you converted the force with which she dragged me to the open window, it'd be enough to power a heater all day. She didn't just let up a little as I frantically tried to think of the words I could use to explain the situation. No, look, there's this guy I knew from junior high named Nakagawa, and he... What? Are you gonna try to make this someone else's fault? You wrote this, didn't you? Haruhi dragged me along, then stared right at my face from maybe 10 centimeters away, made her eyes large and clear. Just let me go. This is no way to have a conversation. Just as I was wrestling with Haruhi, a fourth person appeared. His or her timing seriously bad. What? Asahina's eyes were as big as saucers as she stood in the open doorway. Then she covered her mouth elegantly. Are you busy? Maybe I should come back later. We were at each other's throats, but that didn't really count as busy. There wasn't anything fun about wrestling with Haruhi. If I had to wrestle, I'd take Asahina. Anyway, Nagato was sitting right there doing nothing, so there wasn't any reason why Asahina couldn't come in too, and I'd owe her one if she could help me out of this. I tried to smile at Asahina as I grappled with Haruhi. My goodness. The last brigade member had arrived, and he stood next to Asahina. Am I a bit early, perhaps? Koizumi smiled brightly and brushed his hair aside. Asahina, it seems like we're intruding here. It's best not to interfere with domestic quarrels, so perhaps we should excuse ourselves for the time being and return once things are settled. I'll treat you to a coffee from the vending machine. Hang on, Koizumi. If he thought this was some kind of lover's quarrel, he needed to get his eyesight checked. And don't use this to abduct Asahina either. This is no time for her to be nodding in agreement with you. Haruhi had grabbed my shirt with her madman strength while I gripped her wrist. At this rate, I was going to tear a muscle, so I called out for help. Hey, wait, Koizumi, come on, Koizumi, where are you going? Help me out. What to do? Koizumi decided this was the time to play dumb, while Asahina cowered like a scared rabbit, blinking rapidly. She didn't seem to notice Koizumi putting his arm around her waist as though escorting her somewhere. When I looked to see what Nagato was doing, she was unsurprisingly reading her book, as though none of this had anything to do with her. This was all about her to begin with, so she couldn't spare a few words of explanation. Haruhi's grip tightened. I'm such a dope, letting someone into my brigade who's so stupid that they wrote a ridiculous letter like this. I should resign in shame. I feel like I stuck my foot into a chute filled with roaches. Despite her anger, Haruhi was still smiling incomprehensibly. It was though she didn't know what expression to use in a situation like this. I'd already thought up 13 different punishments before I got here. First, I'm gonna make you jump off the wall with a dried mackerel in your mouth, and then make you fight for territory with the rest of the alley cats, and you'll have to wear cat ears. Now, if Asahina had worn cat ears with her maid outfit, that would have been something to see. But if I did it, I'd get hauled off in one of those legendary super ambulances. We're fresh out of cat ears. Sorry, Nakagawa. If I didn't spill my guts, I'd wind up getting tossed out that window just like your love letter. It wasn't that I wanted to, but if Haruhi's misunderstanding wasn't cleared up, it could mean trouble for the whole of the natural world. I looked into the brigade chief's eyes and used the same calm tone that I used when I tried to calm Shamisen as I trimmed his claws. Listen. First, put me down. Haruhi, let me explain things. I'll make it clear enough to get through even your thick skull. Alright?
2 hours later.
Haruhi sat cross-legged on a folding chair, sipping a cup of hot green tea. You got some weird friends. I mean, he can fall in love at first sight all he wants, but that letter's going too far. It's so stupid. Love could cause brain damage as well as make someone blind. Not that I disagreed with her last statement, though. Haruhi held up the wrinkled piece of notebook paper and waved it around. I thought for sure you teamed up with that moron Taniguchi to give Yuki a hard time. It's kind of a thing he'd do, and Yuki's so quiet. She'd be easy to fool. I figured there wasn't anyone less easy to fool than Nagato anywhere in the galaxy, but I listened without interrupting. Haruhi seemed to notice me exercising my self-control and gave me a glare before her features relaxed. No, I guess you wouldn't do that. You don't have the cunning for this kind of thing. I wasn't sure if she was complimenting me or just being nasty, but at least she didn't think I would pull a thing as the thoughtless elementary school kid would pull, and even Taniguchi had a reasonable amount of discretion for his age. Still, it was the angelic pride of the SOS Brigade that lit the fuse. It's lovely, isn't it? Asahina spoke in a dreamy voice. If someone were like that over me, I think I'd be kind of happy. 10 years. I'd love to meet someone who would wait 10 years for me. It's romantic. She clasped her hands, her eyes shining. I wasn't completely sure if Asahina's definition of romantic was the same as the one I learned or not, but it didn't seem to be. Maybe some words' definitions have changed in the future, and she was the kind of person who didn't understand how boats floated until you explained it to her. Incidentally, Asahina was just wearing her school uniform today. We'd taken the maid outfit, nurse outfit, and all the other costumes to the cleaners, even the frog costume. When Haruhi and I had gone to the cleaners with a stack of clothes all scented with Asahina's fragrance, the old man behind the counter had given us both a stare so unnecessarily hard that I felt a little traumatized afterward. True romance and Nakagawa are worlds apart. I swallowed last of the tea in my teacup and continued. Trust me, he is a big, thick guy who'd never in a million years wind up as the hero of a girl's romantic comic. In animal fortune-telling terms, he'd be the bear with the crescent moon on his chest. Yeah, like one of those gentle giants, I said. I didn't have much to go on, but that was the image that came to mind. His physique was well developed anyway, in a different sense to Asahina's, I mean. I should have apologized to Nakagawa for this, but soon Haruhi had given a dramatic reading of the words he dictated to me. I didn't have the stamina for such a reading, and Koizumi's impression was rather different from Asahina's. Well, that was an excellent composition, I must say. His smile was as pretentious as ever. Above all, it was concrete. Well, it was a bit too idealistic. The honest way in which he was clearly looking at a reality is appealing. One does get the sense that he's lost himself in the passion of the moment, but reading between the lines, one can feel his rising spirit and heart. If he keeps up the effort, this Mr. Nakagawa will become a formidable man indeed. Sounded like something a cut-rate psychoanalyst would say. There was a limit to what you could say about other people's lives, I thought. I could think of all kinds of things to say, as long as I didn't actually take any responsibility for them. What was he, a bogus fortune teller? However, Koizumi smiled again. He certainly is bold, composing a letter like this. And you're a good person, too, for writing it down. I'm afraid my fingers would have refused to do that. Was that a roundabout way of giving me a hard time? Well, unlike you, I actually care about my friends, at least enough to play part-time Cupid, even when I knew what the outcome would be. I shrugged and gave Koizumi my reply. Nagato told me her response before you guys got here. I spoke for Nagato, who was paying equal amounts of attention to Haruhi and Koizumi. 10 years is too long, she says. I mean, of course it is, right? That's what I'd say too. Then, after being silent the entire time, Nagato spoke. Let me see. She reached out with slender fingers. Now that was unusual, I thought. Haruhi seemed to think so too. Oh yeah? So you're interested, are you? Peering past the unevenly cut bangs of the sole member of the literature club. Kyon's the one who wrote it down, but you should hang on to it anyway, as a memento. You don't see this kind of half-direct, half-roundabout love confession much nowadays. Koizumi took the wrinkled paper from Haruhi and passed it to Nagato. Nagato lowered her eyes and read the words I had written, over and over, her eyes flicking up and down over the same lines, as if silently digesting their contents. I cannot wait. Well, of course. But Nagato continued. I will see him. The room fell silent at her statement, and then, as if to deliver a final blow to my slackened jaw, I am interested, she said, looking at me. Her eyes were the way they always were. I knew those eyes well. Honest. Pure. Like handcrafted glass pieces. The big cleaning day wound up being a normal cleaning day. When I suggested we dispose of the books of the bookshelves, Nagato didn't give me a straight yes or no, but just stared at me with a vague sadness that left me unable to say anything more, and the only board game from Koizumi's collection we threw away was a cheap dice game from a magazine we had played only once anyway. Asahina didn't have any personal items save for her tea set, and the disposal of anything that Haruhi brought in was met with a flat, no! Now listen here, Kyon, I won't ever waste anything I can use. If it can be reused, it should be. And so long as it's holding together, I won't throw it away. That's the spirit of environmentalism. I wonder if this is how hoarders got started on their hoarding. If you wanted to be an environmentalist, you shouldn't do anything but the minimum for survival, I thought. This will be the last time we're here this year, so in order to face the new year with a nice clean feeling, we're going home with the place sparkling. Thus ordered, Koizumi and I got to work on the windows. After a while, I glanced at the trio of girls, wondering whether they were cleaning the room or just spreading dust around, when my cleaning partner spoke quietly. This is just between you and me, but there are other organizations besides the agency that are trying to get close to Nagato. Right now, she's every bit as important as you or Suzumiya. Nagato has a unique position even among her fellow humanoid interfaces, which is probably a recent development. I sat on the windowsill and breathed on my wet hand to warm it up, while washing with the other hand. The winter chill robbed of that warmth all too quickly. It was easy to play dumb. Recently, I had experiences with both Nagato and Asahina that still had nothing to do with Haruhi or Koizumi, and as a result, I was still here, so I couldn't just ignore this. I'll figure something out, I answered casually. This whole situation had been caused by me. I'd have to be the one to fix it. Indeed, I'm counting on you. I have my hands quite full with planning the SOS Brigade's winter mountain trip, and I may just say that you can release the stress by quarreling with Suzumiya. I have no such sparring partner. Who is the tomcat now? But the handsome smile on Koizumi's face twisted. Isn't it about time for me to take off this harmless-looking mask and change the character I've been playing for so long? It's quite tiring being so polite to my classmates all the time. If it was so tiring, he could have just stopped. I have no desire to control how he talked, I told him. Well, that won't do at all. My current self fits with the image Suzumiya wishes. I'm quite the specialist in her psychology. Koizumi gave an exaggerated sigh. On that count, I'm rather envious of Asahina. After all, she didn't need to change a single thing about herself. Didn't he say once that Asahina's manner might be an act? I asked him. Oh? You really believe what I said? If I've actually won your trust, perhaps there's some more value in this effort. As evasive as ever. Even Nagato has undergone some internal changes, but Koizumi was the same as always. For Asahina's part, she didn't need the change. I met the other Asahina, so I knew for certain that she'd mature both physically and psychologically. If I were to change somehow... Koizumi wiped more vigorously. That would not be a good sign. My status quo is my duty. I can't imagine you'd want to see me look serious. You're right, I wouldn't, I told him. His grinning face was perfectly suited for cleaning up Haruhi's messes or setting things up for her in advance. I was really looking forward to whatever play waited for us in the snowy mountains. That's enough, right? I said. I can't imagine a finer compliment. I'll accept that. I didn't know whether he meant it or not, but in any case, the words ended up as white condensation on the window. Later that evening, Shamisen was curled up on my bed, and I looked at his sleeping face, feeling warm and pleasant. I wondered where his pleasant feeling came from and pondered the particular distinctions between love and lust, just as I felt I was upon an answer.
Kyon, telephone! The boy from yesterday!
Once again, my sister opened my door to my room, holding the receiver. She handed me the receiver, which was playing some easy listening version of a famous classical tune. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and began tugging at Shamison's whiskers.
Shammy, 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 so funny, mommy's gonna...
I watched Shamison open his eyes slightly to glare at, then ignore my sister. Then watched happily singing Sister as I put the phone to my ear. What have I been thinking about earlier? I wondered. Hello? It's me! My junior high classmate Nakagawa couldn't hide the urgency he was feeling. How did it go? What was her answer? You gotta tell me. I don't care what it was. I'm ready to hear it. Come on, Kyon. Out with it. He sounded like a politician up for re-election, desperately listening to the news of the results. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a favorable answer. I looked at my sister and shushed her as I tried to sound grim. She said she won't wait. She said she can't imagine what would happen in 10 years, that there's no guarantees. Since I was just relaying the facts, the words came smoothly, but just as I was wondering what to do with Nagato's problematic statement that she would see him, I see. Nakagawa's voice was surprisingly calm. I guess I'm not surprised. I didn't think she would agree easily either. I kept waving my head, and my strangely singing sister groaned her irritation before hauling Shamisen off the bed and leaving the room. She was probably going to sleep with him in her own room, but given an hour and Shamisen would probably come slinking back to my room. Cats didn't like being given too much attention. Once my sister left, I put my question to the phone. That's all you have to say after making me read out that humiliating letter? If he had anticipated that reply, he shouldn't have asked me to deliver the message. I realize that getting a heartfelt declaration of love from a complete stranger is bound to be difficult, he said. If you realize that, then don't do it. You probably had a pretty obscure hobby indeed to go around knowingly stepping on landmines. But, this should have at least piqued her interest a bit. You have to be at least a little impressed at Nakagawa's plan. It was true that he was the first one to get Nagato to say she was interested. His message had enough power to do that much anyway. It's enough to make me want to guarantee that he's currently the most shameless guy on the planet. So about that Kyon, I actually have another request. Oh god, what is it now? My spirit of community service was at a low ebb. Did you know that I joined the football team when I started high school? American football, not soccer. This is the first I've heard of it, I said. Oh, well, I did. And that's the favor I need. My team is going to host another school's team for a game. I want you to bring Nagato to watch. I'm first string, of course. When? Tomorrow. I really didn't need another person like Haruhi in my life. Why were their schedules always so cramped? If Nagato won't wait 10 years for me, there's nothing I can do about that. If it's come to this, I'll have to show off some heroics and get her attention that way. Such a simplistic notion. He could have given a little thought to my position at least, or at least thought about how busy the end of my year was. Is it not convenient for you? It wasn't inconvenient. I had no plans tomorrow at all. Nagato probably didn't either. It wasn't inconvenient at all, so at this rate I was probably going to get sucked into watching his heroics or whatever. I told him as much. Great! Please come. It's a friendly game, but we're going to play for keeps. Our football team plays the school from the next town over every year. The outcome of the game is going to determine whether or not we have a pleasant New Year. If we lose, it's going to be the winter vacation from hell. There won't be a break for New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. It's just going to be more practice. Nakagawa sounded serious, even pathetic, but it wasn't my problem. I told him that there were a pile of annoying things I needed to take care of by the end of the year. There weren't many days before the mountain trip, after all. Kyon, I do not care about whatever plans you have. What's important is Nagato. Please just ask her. If she refuses, then I'll give up. But so long as there's even one chance in 1,000, I'll take that chance. Dreams will always stay mere dreams without action. That sounded like a load of bullshit to me. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. God damn it, I'm so nice. Fine, I said. I flopped down on the bed and sighed. I'll call Nagato after this. I had a premonition Nagato would not refuse. Where was your school again? You know, if Nagato says okay, I'll bring her over. I'd probably bring some other people too. That was alright, wasn't it? Oh, you're a great matchmaker! I'll be calling on you again for the wedding. No, perhaps I'll name my first child after you! Bye, I said coldly, then hung up. If I let Nakagawa go on, I felt like worms would start coming out of my brain. I put the cordless phone receiver on the shelf and got my cell phone, then looked up Nagato's number and gave her a call. The next day came very quickly.
You're late! You're the one who called us out here, and you're the last to arrive? Do you even care about this?
Haruhi smiled and pointed at me. We were at the station where the SOS Brigade always met. 3 others were also waiting for me: Nagato, Koizumi, and Asahina. My original idea just to bring the silent android along with me, but going to the game with just the 2 of us simply wasn't possible. I didn't even want to think about what punishment awaited us if the brigade chief found out we'd done something without her. Everyone would have to come along. After I called Nagato to get her answer, I called up the other 3 to invite them along as well. The fact that everybody had come said a lot about how much free time we all had thanks to winter vacation. Or maybe they just wanted to see what kind of guy would fall in love with Nagato at first sight. Owing to the midwinter chill, everyone had bundled up. Asahina's outfit was particularly notable. The fluffy furriness of her white synthetic fur coat made her look as lovely as innocent white bunny rabbits hopping through the mountain snow. She was the one people should be falling in love with. Nagato wore a simple duffel coat over her school uniform, the hood drawn over her head. Unsurprisingly, her face was so expressionless that you would never have guessed she was going to see a guy who confessed his love for her.
Alright, let's go! I can't wait to see what this guy looks like. Also, it'll be my first time watching a football game!
Haruhi wasn't the only one who sounded like she was up for a picnic. Asahina and Koizumi were both smiling. My own face was hollow, and Nagato's was blank.
I checked the bus map in advance. It's about 30 minutes to the boys' school from here. Here's the entrance.
With a voice like a tour guide, Koizumi showed us the way. I had less and less to say. They sure seemed to be having fun, Koizumi and Haruhi, and maybe even Asahina. As we walked, Koizumi casually drew alongside me and whispered significantly into my ear.
You do certainly have some mysterious friends.
I waited for him to say more, but he only smiled and went back to his role as tour guide. Nakagawa was mysterious? Maybe. One thing was certain: no ordinary person would ever take one look at Nagato and be instantly struck down with love. As we made our way to the bus station, something felt amiss about it all. I had a bad feeling about this. After half an hour of bouncing along a private bus, it was a few minutes' walk from the bus stop to Nakagawa's school. When we got there, the game had already started. Thanks to my oversleeping, we'd missed 2 earlier buses, and was now 15 minutes past the start time Nakagawa had given me. It didn't seem like we could enter on the school grounds, so we walked alongside it until coming to a field enclosed by a chain link fence, there was a big football scrimmage that was being held.
Wow, it's such a big field!
Asahina gave voice to her wonder, and I had to nod. Unlike North High's grounds, dug forcibly out of a hillside, the flat, expansive field of this private boys' school spoke of money. The place where we were standing was roughly 1 floor higher than the level of the field, which gave us an excellent view. Aside from us 5, there seemed to be a few old guys passing by and some girls who seemed to be groupies, cheering on the 2 private schools' teams. The sound of colliding uniforms and helmets in blue and white reached our ears, and we 5 lined up in the empty spot to watch. Nagato was silent and betrayed no reaction, even now. I had only a casual understanding of the rules of football. After our mostly effortless victory in the baseball tournament, Haruhi had brought in forms for participation in the football and soccer tournaments. We wound up in participating in either, after too much hassle, but just in case, I'd gone and looked up the basics. It seemed simple, but it was actually quite deep. Not impossibly so, but hardly something a club like ours could just pick up and do, I could tell. Watching from here, I could tell that my decision had been the correct one. The offense carried an oblong ball similar to a rugby ball and tried to advance down the field by passing and running with it, while the defense tried to stop that advance by chasing down the guy with the ball, their protective gear clattering loudly whenever they collided with one another. Yep, this definitely was an American sport. Huh. Haruhi clung to the chain link fence and watched the clump of players.
So, which one is Nakagawa?
Number 82 on the white team. I explained according to what Nakagawa had told me the previous day. Nakagawa was a tight end, which meant he was at the edge of the offensive line, responsible for both blocking and catching passes. Nakagawa was quick despite his bulk, so it was the perfect spot for him.
Wait, why are the players trading places? They look the same.
There are offensive players and defensive players. Nakagawa's on offense.
Since everyone's wearing helmets, I'm sure they're allowed to headbutt, but how far does it go? Only judo throws? Or anything?
None of that, and no headbutting either, I said. Ugh. Haruhi gazed at the field intently. North High didn't have a football team, but if it did, there was no question she'd try to get on and wreak havoc.
It sure is an exciting sport, though. Perfect for wintertime.
I listened to Haruhi's commentary and took a look at Nagato, who was following the ball, evidently not thinking about anything in particular. The five of us stood there and watched private school boys smash into each other for a while.
Would anyone like some tea?
Asahina took a thermos and paper cups out of her bag.
I thought it would be cold, so I brought something warm to drink.
The smiling Asahina might as well have been an angel. I thankfully accepted her tea. I had only been getting colder as we stood out beneath the chilly sky watching the game. There we watched two teams play football, sipping Asahina's delicious hand-brewed tea. The second quarter came to a desultory end, and we sat there and watched, as it was now halftime. It was hard to make out faces from that distance, but I did catch an occasional glimpse from jersey number 82. As for the game, it wasn't anything special. There were no long, showy passes or 30-yard runs. Each team just kind of kept creeping along the first downs, and the score represented only the handful of field goals they had managed. There hadn't really been any touchdowns. That might have meant that they were both evenly matched and that defenses were working hard. However, I do know a certain someone who hates it when things get boring, and her name is, say it with me everybody,
This isn't much fun at all,
she said. Haruhi stomped her feet as she frowned. She wasn't the only one whose breath was coming out white either.
At least half the players get to run around.
Haruhi wrapped her arms around herself.
But we're just standing here getting cold. Is there like a cafe or something?
The picnic mood seemed to have been blown away by the chilly winter wind. Asahina did not have an infinite amount of tea, and we'd long since run out. Even if we had it, the last half would have gone cold before we could finish it, irrespective of the amount of love she made it with, so it wasn't much good for warming it up. Even worse, today marked the arrival of the coldest cold front of the winter, and Haruhi wasn't the only one whose teeth were chattering from the chill. Koizumi, Asahina, and I were right there with her. The only one who didn't seem to mind was Nagato, who never seemed to care what the temperature was.
I guess it really is no fun unless you're playing. Maybe I should get them to let me join. I bet I could throw that ball.
Haruhi squinted her eyes in the face of the wind that tried to rob her of her body heat.
And if I don't do something like that, I'm just gonna freeze here. Kyon, do you have anything, like hand warmers?
If I had, I'd be using them myself. If she wanted to warm herself up that badly, she could just run laps around the school grounds or play Red Rover. That made the most economic and environmental sense.
Fine then. I got a perfectly nice hand warmer right here. Human size, too.
Haruhi slowly came up behind Asahina and embraced her, wrapping her arms around the poor girl's delicate neck.
What are you doing?
Asahina was unsurprisingly dismayed.
Oh, Mikuru, you're so warm and soft, too.
Haruhi buried her chin in an unsullied snow-like fur of Asahina's collar, embracing the petite, and occasionally abundant, figure of her upperclassman.
I think I'll stay like this a while. You jealous, Kyon?
You damn right I was. Although if I had my choice, I would have wanted to hug her from the front. Haruhi pursed her lips.
What?
She cut herself off, then took a breath.
So, with Mikuru then?
I looked back and forth between Haruhi's mischievous face and Asahina's terrified eyes as the former held her embrace on the ladder, and I tried to think of a way to answer. From behind me, my rescue appeared.
Would you like to play Red Rover with me then?
Butting into the conversation, the disgusting Koizumi smiled disgustingly.
I wouldn't mind going for a jog, but I'd also be just fine wrestling around with another man.
Well, I wasn't fine. I've said it before, but I don't bat for that team. Koizumi should have stuck to giving football commentary. This was about me, Nagato, and Nakagawa anyway. Koizumi was just a bonus. In fact, given the circumstances, Asahina and Haruhi were bonuses too. I gave him a sidelong glare. I don't care, man. The central character for the day, Nagato, was as silent as always, unmoving as she watched the field. I got a feeling she was always following Nakagawa with her eyes, but there was no way to know for sure. Meanwhile, Nakagawa never once looked our way, whether he was moving around the field as part of the offensive line or sitting on the sidelines. I'd gone through all the trouble of bringing Nagato out here, and now, nothing? Even now, during halftime, he was gathered with his teammates in a circle that they had serious screaming meetings with. Had his desire for victory won out over all other considerations? Or was all this on purpose? If the things he said were true, he'd been completely dumbstruck upon seeing Nagato from a distance. I thought it had to be an exaggeration, but if it were true, he definitely wouldn't want to be stricken thusly during the game. Whatever, I muttered, looking back at Nagato's head as the wind brushed the nape of her neck. I guess we could meet up with Nakagawa once the game was over, and he came out of the school. If the second half ended smoothly, Nakagawa's team would win and he'd be free. The previous day, Nagato had said she wouldn't mind seeing him, so having them meet up wouldn't bother anybody. Truth be told, I wasn't thrilled with the idea, but that didn't mean I was so callous as to mercilessly crush somebody else's hopes and dreams. I could hear a guy out after all. And yet, unfortunately, things did not go smoothly. The whistle signaling the resumption of play had blown, and we were about 5 minutes into the third quarter when Nakagawa was taken away in an ambulance. Allow me to describe the circumstances of the injury. It went something like this. The second half began with the opposing team's kickoff. The returner got tackled at the 20-yard line, whereupon it was time for Nakagawa's team to take the offense. The teams lined up and hunched down at the line of scrimmage. Nakagawa was on the far edge. In the center, the white uniformed quarterback seemed to call out some kind of signal to his left and right. At the signal, Nakagawa moved sideways along the line. At the same time, the quarterback received the ball and took 2 or 3 steps as the tackle of linebackers and defense came rushing toward like wild beasts. Nakagawa sprinted, heading to the inside, but then he turned and moved as though he was receiving a pass. But it was a fake. The quarterback flicked his wrist and sent the ball past Nakagawa to the wide receiver. Oh! I wasn't sure whether Haruhi or Asahina had raised their voice in surprise. The ball spun like a bullet shot from a rifle, but the trajectory was a bit off. An opposing linebacker made a desperate jump but couldn't quite manage the interception. Nakagawa's team narrowly avoided a turnover as the ball brushed his fingers, but that was just enough to perturb its path. Just then, I saw Nagato, up until that point as still as a Bachiva's statue, move her hand. She drew her hood over her head, tugging it down a bit to obscure her line of sight, but from what of her face I could see her lips were moving. She was definitely muttering something, and fast too. I only caught it out of the corner of my eye, since my attention was on the field. Whoa! I leaned forward, eyes widening. I thought the ball had only been deflected slightly, but then I realized that the destination was the place where Nakagawa was currently dashing to at top speed. I saw him make the perfect leap, grab the ball in midair, and try to make a stable landing, but no. Just as Nakagawa jumped, the cornerback who had been covering him also jumped. His goal was the same ball that every player prized nearly as much as his own life. The cornerback had taken his broad jump just as Nakagawa was reaching the ball. As humans do not possess the wings they would need to change direction in midair, the player's energy dropped to 0 as he collided with the falling Nakagawa. Given that both players bounced off and away from each other, you can imagine how intense the impact was. The opposing quarterback spun 90 degrees and fell into his back, while the defenseless Nakagawa rotated a full half turn, landing perfectly vertical on his neck. Asahina cried out in concern. I yelled too. Nakagawa had clearly landed in the worst possible way for a human being to land, like a pro wrestler who just received the tombstone pile driver. But at least wrestlers had the mat. All Nakagawa had under him was the hard, cold earth. Lagging just behind the sight came the sound, a sound nobody wants to hear. If he was lucky, that dull crack was the sound of his helmet splitting. Otherwise, it was bone. The referee blew the whistle and stopped the game. Nakagawa laid still. He stopped moving, clinging to the ball as though it was some precious memento from his parents. No, he didn't move at all. This wasn't funny. Is he gonna be okay? Haruhi clung to the fence, her brow furrowed. Asahina half hid herself behind Haruhi's shoulder, as though turning away from a violent scene in a horror movie. Oh, there's the stretcher, she said, her voice tremulous. Surrounded by his teammates, Nakagawa's prone form was quickly moved to the stretcher and taken to the sidelines. His determination admirable, he still clung to the ball. The scene was so moving, it would be unbelievable if his team didn't rally and defeat their opponents. Lying there on the stretcher with his helmet removed, Nakagawa seemed to have dodged a bullet. He opened his eyes in response to the calls of the people around him, nodding to answer their questions. He tried to sit up, only collapsed back down, but at least he was still breathing. It's probably a minor concussion. Koizumi made his diagnosis. I doubt there's much to worry about. These things happen in sports like this. I don't know where he got off making that call from a distance, and not being a doctor to begin with. Hopefully he was right, but the head is such a bad place to take an impact. The coach and faculty advisor just seemed as concerned as I was, and soon the wailing siren of an ambulance approached. Your friend has rotten luck, said Haruhi, sounding regretful. He tries to show off to Yuki and then gets injured instead. Maybe he got too eager. She sounded sympathetic. Did she really want Nakagawa and Nagato to hit it off? Even though she slammed the door in the computer club's president's face when he wanted to borrow Nagato. I asked her as much, to which she replied, Listen, Kyon, I think that love is kind of a disease, but I'm not going to interfere in other people's love lives just for kicks. Everybody has their own path to happiness. I shrugged, letting Haruhi's overlong philosophy of romance go in one ear and out the other. Sorry, but if Asahina's boyfriend turned out to be a loser, I don't care how happy she seemed. I wasn't confident I'd be able to be happy for her. I might even try to interfere. I don't think anyone could blame me, though. I hope your friend is alright. an expression of true concern on her face. She definitely wasn't faking it. That's just the kind of person she was. Her prayers could heal you in half an hour, even if every bone in your body was broken. I was sure Nakagawa would be fine. The ambulance finally arrived, and Nakagawa was loaded into it, as carefully as though he were a cardboard box marked fragile, handle with care. As soon as he was inside the ambulance and the doors were shut behind him, the siren blared back to life, the almost painfully bright flashing lights winking red as it headed off into the distance. So, what's next? Nakagawa's demonstration was unavoidably cancelled thanks to his withdrawal, but with his departure went our desire to watch the rest of the scrimmage. It was freezing cold after all, and our primary reason for standing there would soon be arriving to a hospital.
Shouldn't we go to the hospital too?
Haruhi spoke suddenly.
He was our whole reason for coming, and if he was going there, so we should follow him. We can see how this turns out. It'll be a great scene, with a worried Yuki going to visit him at his bedside. I bet he'll be really moved. Plus, the hospital will be heated. What do you think?
She obviously thought it was a grand idea, but I didn't really feel like entering a hospital for a while. I've been sustaining trauma ever since meeting Haruhi.
Aren't you worried about your friend? Let me tell you, when you got taken away in an ambulance, I definitely worried about you. I mean, like a certain amount.
Haruhi dragged me along by the arm, her tone brusque.
Honestly, you caused me so much trouble.
She walked a few steps with me, then stopped.
By the way, which hospital did the ambulance go to?
How the fuck was I supposed to know?
I'll look into it,
said Koizumi, brandishing his cell phone with a smile.
This will just take a moment.
Koizumi turned his back on us and walked a few steps away, then pushed a button on his phone and had a quiet exchange with whomever he called. Maybe a minute later, he flipped his phone closed and then turned back to us and smiled.
I found his destination.
I don't know where he called, but it wasn't 911.
It's a hospital we know quite well. I doubt I need to tell you how to get there.
A wave of memory hit me, my mind recalling the white of the sheets and the red of the apples. Koizumi smiled at me.
You got it. The general hospital you were taken to not so long ago.
As in the one where his uncle's friend was the director. I glared at Koizumi. This had better been a coincidence.
It's a coincidence.
Koizumi chuckled as he saw my 1,000-yard stare.
No, it really is. Quite unexpected. Honestly, I'm quite surprised myself.
I didn't trust him anyway, so his trustworthy smile was wasted on me.
Alright, let's go to the hospital. Can we get a cab somewhere? With 5 of us, we can split the fare and it'll be cheap.
Haruhi immediately started lining things up.
Suzumiya, I was thinking we could have a meeting regarding the upcoming trip to the mountains. We'll leave the hospital visit to these two, while you, Asahina, and I could nail down the details of the trip. We haven't sorted things out like luggage, precise dates, and so on, so we need to finalize those details.
Haruhi wobbled misstep at Koizumi's statement.
Oh, really?
Yes, said Koizumi, continuing.
New Year's Eve is right around the corner. A holiday in a snowy mountain lodge is a big event. Honestly, I'd planned to hold the SOS Brigade's winter trip meeting today, but some unexpected things came up.
Well, excuse me, I said.
Not at all, but in exchange, I'll leave Nagato in your hands. You should hurry to the hospital and check in on Mr. Nakagawa. Regarding what to do there, I'll leave it at your discretion. Asahina, Suzumiya, and I will be at our usual cafe. Will that do, Suzumiya?
Haruhi pursed her lips and frowned.
I guess so. There's definitely no point in me going to the hospital. Kyon's friend only cares about Yuki.
She looked a little irritated, though.
Alright, Kyon, you go with Yuki to see your friend. If he can write a love letter like that, he'll probably jump right out of the hospital bed after he sees Yuki for 5 seconds.
But then she pointed at me harshly.
But you better tell me everything that happens, got that?
She said with a half-angry, half-amused expression. We took a bus back to our rendezvous point, then split into 2 groups to go our separate ways. Nagato and I would change buses and head to the hospital, while Haruhi and the rest would continue to be regulars at the nearby cafe. Worries encrusted my mind like barnacles. I was worried enough about Nakagawa, who'd gotten injured just as he was trying to impress Nagato, but I was even more concerned about what Koizumi had said.
You certainly do have some mysterious friends.
The mysterious part especially bothered me. I didn't have any friends who were particularly exceptional, and if I had to pick one, it would be Koizumi himself. What was it about Nakagawa that he thought was so mysterious? And then there had been the strange incantation that Nagato had been chanting. Nakagawa's accident had happened immediately afterward, and even the dumbest person imaginable would have been able to put the 2 events together, given the pattern so far. Yes, Nagato was quite an artist, if she could turn me into an ace reliever capable of striking out 3 consecutive batters. Her face buried within the hood of her coat, Nagato said nothing, but the answer would soon be revealed. Upon asking at the reception desk, we learned that Nakagawa had already been examined and treated, and he was now resting in a hospital room. Though not serious, his injuries apparently required observation. I headed to the room number we were given, Nagato trailing behind me like a ghost. Hardly a hospital room, we found Nakagawa in a 6-person ward. Nakagawa, you doing okay? Hey, Kyon. My former classmate wore a blue hospital gown and laid there on the bed. He didn't look especially injured with his close-cropped jock haircut. He sat up like a panda awoken from a nap. You got great timing. They just finished examining me. I'm gonna stay for the night for observation. I kinda tweaked on my neck and got a concussion when I fell, which is why I felt like I wanted to throw up. I called my coach and told him I'd be out tomorrow, so he didn't have to come visit. As he was talking, he noticed the ghost standing behind me. His eyes widened. Is that... could it be... It was indeed. This is Nagato. Yuki Nagato. I brought her along to cheer you up. Ah! Nakagawa suddenly straightened his sturdy frame, spitting bolt upright. Well, aren't you feeling healthy? I thought. Apparently one of his heads is working great. I'm Nakagawa! He shouted by way of self-introduction. Naka as in Chuya Nakahara, and Kawa as in the Yellow River. Humbly at your service. Yuki Nagato. She gave her name, her voice unmoved. She hadn't bothered to take off her duffel coat or even pull back the hood. Unable to watch any longer, I flipped back the hood. We'd come all the way to meet him. It would have been a waste if he never got a proper look at her face. The silent Nagato just stared at Nakagawa. After about 10 seconds, he finally cracked. Nakagawa's expression turned somehow dubious. You're Nagato, right? Yes, said Nagato. The one who was walking with Kyon this spring? Yes. At the supermarket near the station? Yes. Oh. Nakagawa's face darkened. I'd expected him to cry tears of joy or faint dead away. So, what was this sudden unpleasantness? Nagato looked at Nakagawa as though he were a motionless flatfish in an aquarium, while Nakagawa regarded her as he would a manhole cover in the middle of the street. Such a staring match could only go on for so long, and sure enough, the first to turn away was Nakagawa. Kyon. He tried to speak quietly, but all the other patients in the ward would have easily heard. But he was gesturing with his finger to quietly call me closer, and I couldn't very well ignore him. What is it? Listen, we need to talk about, I could see him constantly glancing over at Nagato. Evidently, he wanted to ask something about her. I looked over at Nagato to confirm. Yeah, he said. Despite the lack of telepathy, Nagato turned around and walked out of the room as though carried by a conveyor belt. Once he saw Nagato slide the door shut behind her, Nakagawa sighed in relief. Is she really Nagato? Like the real one? I'd never seen a fake Nagato, that was for sure. I'd seen her act rather differently sometimes, but that's a whole other story. Hey man, be happier, I said. Your future bride came to visit you. Can't you show a little gratitude? Yeah. Nakagawa muttered and nodded. That was Nagato, not a twin sister or a look-alike? What was he trying to say? Don't tell me you need her to wear glasses, I told him. Hadn't he bumped into her recently? She quit wearing them at my request, so if he had a glasses fetish, I didn't want to hear about that. No, that's not it. Nakagawa looked up at me with a pained expression. I can't explain it. Just give me a second to think, Kyon. I'm sorry. He just sat there on the hospital bed, groaning. Had that blow to the head really messed something up after all? His reactions were incomprehensible. No matter what I said to him, he just groaned and looked up at the ceiling, as though deep in thought. Eventually, he even clutched his head as though in pain. I gave up and decided to leave. Nakagawa, I'm gonna want to hear a reason for this eventually. What do I tell her? My report to Haruhi was going to be pointless too. If I told her the truth now, a flinty-eyed glare would be all that greeted me. I left the hospital room where Nagato was leaning against the hallway's wall waiting for me. She turned her dark eyes to me for a moment, then looked back at the floor. Let's go. Nagato gave a slight nod, then fell and stepped behind me. I stalked tiger beetle-like ahead of the quiet Nagato, heading for the bus terminal. The scene that followed with the cafe barely merits explanation. Haruhi talked merrily away about her plans for winter vacation, while Koizumi mechanically agreed with her. Asahina seemed to be enjoying her Darjeeling tea as she sipped it, while I sat there, discouraged, and Nagato played the role of the silent listener as she watched the proceedings. We split the bill, and today's SOS Brigade activities came to an end. When I went home, I was greeted by this.
"Oh, Kyon, perfect timing. There's a call for you."
My sister smiled, holding out the receiver with one hand while dragging shamisen around with the other. I took both the phone and the cat and went to my room. As I expected, the call was from Nakagawa. This is hard for me to say, but... Nakagawa had informed me that he was calling from a payphone at the hospital, and from the tone of his voice, he indeed sounded reluctant to continue. Could you give her the message that I'm withdrawing my marriage proposal? He sounded like a mid-sized company president begging for an extension on a loan. You want to tell me why? Meanwhile, I sounded like an irritated creditor facing a helpless business owner. After creating this one-sided fantasy, you're backing out after one day? What have you been doing the past few months? You meet Nagato face to face, and suddenly you're not interested? Depending on your explanation, I may have not much to say to you. I'm sorry, I don't really understand it myself. Nakagawa sounded genuinely contrite. When she rushed over to the hospital to see me, I was so happy. I should thank you for that. But when I saw her, she didn't have the luminous aura. No matter how I looked at her, she looked like an ordinary girl. She was an ordinary girl. I don't understand what happened. I thought of Nagato's face, with its uncertainty-inspiring expression. Kyon, I've been thinking about it, and I've finally come to a conclusion. I thought I had fallen in love with Nagato, but that feeling's gone. I can only assume I was completely mistaken. I asked what he was mistaken about. Mistaken about love at first sight. When you really think about it, there's no such thing as falling in love. I was wrong all along. Uh-huh. So then, Nakagawa, what of your description of being struck dumb at the sight of an angelic light surrounding Nagato, of being frozen stiff with a single look? I don't know, man. He sounded as apologetic as a meteorologist who'd just been asked to give a weather forecast for the next century. I just have no idea. I can only guess that it was all in my imagination. I see. I sounded mean, but I didn't really mean to attack Nakagawa. Actually, I wasn't even that surprised. Things had turned out mostly how I guessed they would. As soon as Nakagawa had made me listen to his mad ravings, I'd wonder if this would be the way of things. Alright, Nakagawa, I'll pass that on to Nagato. She won't think badly of you. I don't think she was into the idea to begin with. She'll forget you in an instant. I heard a sigh of relief through the receiver. Okay, I hope so. Please tell her how sorry I am. There must have been something wrong with me. Most likely there had been. Nakagawa hadn't had any doubt, but something had happened to him. And now he was back to normal, as though someone had cast a restoration spell on him. I chatted with Nakagawa for a while, and then his phone card ran low on time, and we said our goodbyes. We'd probably meet again. Eventually. After hanging up, I called another number. Hey, can you meet? Soon? I arranged a time and a place to meet up with the person on the other end of the call, then picked up my scarf. Shamisen was sprawled out asleep on my coat. He rolled onto the floor and gave me an accusatory glare when I pulled it out from under him. Yesterday had been so difficult, and with all the running around, today had been no better. But soon the day would come to an end. I rode my bike to the Mecca for Weirdos, the park in front of the station near Nagato's apartment. This was the place where Nagato had first called me back in May, as well as the place where I'd first awoken when I traveled back in time with Asahina to the Tanabata Festival 3 years previous. And more recently, I'd sat here with Asahina the Elder during my second trip back in time. The memories. They all came flooding back to me. Sitting on the old bench waiting for me was a hooded Jawa-like figure. Lit only by the street lamp, she looked as though she was emerging from the darkness itself. Yo, Nagato. I called to the small figure that was looking right at me. Sorry for calling you out so suddenly. Just like I told you on the phone, Nakagawa changed his mind. Nagato stood naturally, then nodded. I see. I looked into her dark eyes. Think maybe you could tell me the whole story now? I've ridden over here pretty quickly to keep my body warm. I could withstand the night's chill a little bit longer. I can understand why Nakagawa might have fallen in love with you so quickly. Everyone has a type after all. But why would he suddenly change his mind today? It's unnatural. And with the football game, it's just too much to swallow that he would get an injury today just to make him forget about his feelings. You did something. I know I saw you doing something during the game. You were the one who made him have that accident. It was you. Am I right? Yes. Nagato's answer was simple. She looked up at me.
I am not the one he saw. She sounded as though she were reading an essay aloud. What he saw was the data overmind. I listened quietly while Nagato continued. He has the ability to use me as a terminal to access the data overmind. The cold wind made my ears hurt, but I doubt he understood what he was seeing. Mere organic life forms like humans are on a different level of consciousness from the data overmind. I saw a radiance shining out from behind her, light as though from heaven itself. That's how Nakagawa explained it. Nagato continued her emotionless explanation. What he probably saw was accumulated transcendental knowledge and understanding. While what would have passed through the terminal was insignificant, the information would have overwhelmed him. So it was a misunderstanding then. I looked at Nagato's tousled hair and sighed. What Nakagawa was sure had been Nagato's true inner nature had simply been a bit of the data overmind. I don't really understand the details, but Nagato's boss possesses a history and a power far beyond the reckoning of any human. It's hardly strange that by accidentally accessing that, Nakagawa got overwhelmed, like a computer freezing when its browser crashes. And Nakagawa got confused and thought he'd fallen in love with you or whatever then? Yes. And then you corrected his feelings. The messy bowl-cut hair nodded. I analyzed, then deleted his powers, answered Nagato. Human intellectual capacity is insufficient for interfacing with the data overmind. I projected that eventually he would suffer adverse effects. I could believe it. One glance at Nagato had been enough to send Nakagawa into a daze, making 10-year plans a few months later. I shudder to think how crazy he might have gotten if he were left alone. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. When did Nakagawa even have that power? Has he always had this ability to see the data overmind through you? He probably acquired it 3 years ago. So it all goes back to that again, huh? The reason Nagato, Asahina, and Koizumi are all out here can also be traced back to something that happened 3 years ago. Or rather, something Haruhi made happen. And that's when I realized it. The ability Nagato had mentioned, I understood now. Nakagawa might very well have been a candidate to become an Esper like Koizumi. Haruhi had definitely done something 3 years earlier, something unimaginable, to create this temporal rift, to create an explosion of data, to create Espers. So it was entirely possible that Nakagawa could be something like Koizumi. Koizumi's strange statement made sense now. Whether he knew all along or just found out in the last couple of days, he must have known about Nakagawa's power. That's what he meant by mysterious friends. Possibly, agreed Nagato. I felt a shiver that wasn't just because of the cold. There was no reason that such events were limited to 3 years ago. Was Haruhi still giving people supernatural abilities? Just like she made cherry blossoms bloom in autumn, or turned shrine pigeons into doves. Like that, but with humans? Nagato stood and began to walk away, not answering. Or perhaps she said all she came to say. I stood still as she passed by me, beginning to fade into the darkness like a wandering spirit about to ascend to the Buddha. Wait, can I ask you just one thing? I called out to her form, feeling something I should have put into words. Nakagawa had fallen so deeply in love with Nagato that he'd entrusted an incredibly embarrassing love letter to me. To my knowledge, no one else has ever confessed their love to her so directly. What did she think when I read the proposal to her the next day? What did it feel like hearing someone say, I love you, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, only to find out it was all just a mistake? The question spilled out of me. Were you disappointed? In the months since I met her, we've done a lot together. That's true of Haruhi, Asahina, and Koizumi too, but nearly all the incidents involve Nagato somehow. And you could say that she makes my internal pendulum swing the farthest. Haruhi will always get on by her own power. Asahina's fine the way she is, and who cares what happens to Koizumi. But Nagato, I had to ask. I couldn't help myself. When you found out his confession was a mistake, were you a little disappointed? Nagato stopped, then turned her head just enough that I could tell she was looking back. A sudden wind blew her hair across her face. The night wind was bitterly cold as it sliced over my ears. I waited for a bit, and eventually these small, quiet words were carried to me by the chilly air. Just a bit.